Greetings one and all, and welcome to the first Horror Games Tales. Now, I was kinda hoping I'd be able to do my usual Halloween specials, where basically I bring up video games, and, 3 of them to be exact, and talk about them in this creepy storytelling sort of style. Sadly, I've not been able to this year, due to personal matters in my life, as well as poor planning on my part. So I'm extremely sorry about this, and I hope that I can do it next year, because I feel like I really let you all down. So I thought, why not do something different this year, and talk about horror in video games, but on a more personal level, as in my own personal experiences of it. And what better way to start than with Resident Evil? Oh yeah. The voice sends shivers down your spine, especially to those who remember it. The games are actually quite decent, from a survival horror standpoint. The first 3 were anyway. 4 was okay, with a great mix between horror and action, though with a bit more emphasis on the fact that it's changed its gameplay style from what originally was a tank-controlled shooter game, where you're just walking around, pre-rendered backgrounds and shooting zombies with these clunky controls, right to modernizing the system with essentially over-the-shoulder third-person shooting gameplay, which I didn't have a problem with. I actually understood it because of the fact you have to evolve the series somehow, just so then it didn't feel like you were stagnating it. Now, I'm gonna actually go into my personal experiences of this series. Well, you see, the surprising thing about this is, well, you're gonna be half surprised by this, but the first game I ever experienced in the Resident Evil franchise was Resident Evil 2. No surprise there. But I never played it. You see, when my cousin lived next door to me and our family, basically I went over to his house, because sometimes I would love to go over to his house, see what type of video games he or my uncle were playing. Usually they'd be on the PC that was in their hallway, or the PlayStation 1, which was in their living room. And one day I came over to visit my cousin, and I saw him playing Resident Evil 2. At first I didn't know what it was, and when I asked him, he told me what the title was of the game. And as soon as I kept watching, the more I really didn't like it. Because, well, you see, me and horror back then didn't really get on well. I was always so frightened and easily scarred by games, or anything in general, really. And watching him play Resident Evil 2 upset me quite a bit, just because it was these things I had never seen before. Because back then I had no idea what zombies were, and I was so frightened by this that I actually, even though I stayed for like 5 minutes, I left to get back home and hug my mum, just because I was so frightened. I didn't really know what to do with myself after seeing the zombies in the game, and I didn't really want to go back there for a while. But by the time I got to college, I decided to give horror games a chance, to see if it'd be my cup of tea, because I was at that time now where I wanted to try many different games, because I was so in love with RPGs in general, from both the Western and the Japanese side of the spectrum, and fighting games. So I really wanted to expand my horizons at that time, so I got a hold of the copy of Resident Evil 4, and I really liked it a lot. It was a lot of fun, with the both mix of action and some really cool horrifying moments that I felt were in there. That really got me on the edge of my seat from time to time, or really got me on guard. And because of this, it made me interested in going back to the first 3 Resident Evil games and try them out. So I got a hold of them, and I found I liked them as well. Varied degrees. I like Resident Evil 1. I really, really like Resident Evil 2 just because of the way the game presents itself. But in general, I really liked the terrible acting because of how intentional it was. Because you see, the Resident Evil games were all homages to B horror movies, right down to terrible acting. So really, if you think it's intentional or unintentional, that's your view, but to me, I feel that it's heavily intentional, the terrible acting they executed in these games. And let's be honest, Resident Evil 4 and onwards basically improved voice acting. It really wasn't that great. It's on par with the modern B-horror movies, especially with over-hammy acting. Thank you, DC Douglas Wesker, who I adore. So to be honest, when Resident Evil 5 came out, I completely understood why everyone threw a hissy fit on why there was so much action compared to horror. Even I noticed it. Though to be honest, Resident Evil 5 is kind of a guilty pleasure for me just because of the story is so ridiculous. And just because Wesker really steals it for me, especially with DC Douglas voicing him, because it's so hammy and wonderfully, yes, I'm so going to chew the cedar sort of style of acting, that I just adored it, even though I really disliked the fact that horror took a back seat. And the less said about the stupid controversy at the time, the better, just because, let's put it this way, the people who complained about it didn't really research the game, nor did they play it just to see if it really was racist. Because in the story, if they actually played it, there was quite a fair few African people in the game who were not zombies that were shooting zombified Africans. So really, there was no reason for them to complain there, I felt. But anyway, enough about that. That's just a personal view of mine. And to be honest, it really went downhill from there for me because I never really bought a Resident Evil game after that, because Resident Evil 5 sort of betrayed what my expectations were for what I wanted to see in horror games. But then I thought I would not play another one after that until Demonox bought a copy of Resident Evil 6 and I played that as well. And you know what? Despite some problems with the story and some parts that I really didn't like, this was like a really strange Resident Evil title that I strangely liked. It's more of the guilty pleasure side of it, just because, well, you see, Resident Evil 6 decided to do something extremely different, where basically each one of the characters you played as, and basically you would play as either Chris Redfield or Piers, Leon and some woman I forgot the name of, sadly, and Jake and Sherry Birkin. Sadly, Ada Wong had to be was a single player thing, so we had to basically play as Ada Wong and pass the pad back and forth to each other. And basically, each one of these pairs would have a very, very different way of handling the game in execution. For example, Chris and Piers had the Gears of War-esque like gameplay, where basically there was so much action everywhere. The people didn't act like zombies at the end of the day. While Leon and the woman he would work with in that game had way more horror than action, which by the way was the best scenario in my opinion, just because compared to the other scenarios, that scenario had a better balance of horror in there. And lastly, we had Jake and Sherry Birkin, who had action, but it was like, I don't know how to describe it, because you got one of the characters who is like this overpowered person, a la Wesker, from Resident Evil 5, and so I guess it's bordering on action really than it is horror, even though it kind of feels like Resident Evil 4, 5-ish in the grand scheme of it all. But the thing is, though, while I dislike Resident Evil 6, I also had a guilty pleasure for it in my heart. I wouldn't recommend they do that again, because that game felt highly experimental at best. Like, Capcom at the time were treating the audience with 3 different scenarios of game styles and wanted to see the reactions of what would be the best, essentially. And I think they might have taken that on board because from what I've heard, Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 did surprisingly well. Then again, I think Revelations came before 6, so Resident Evil Revelations 2 probably took from that. That is if I've heard correctly, because there were still problems with the game, but I don't know from experience just because I gave up playing Resident Evil games after 5. Well, I would have gave up after 5 if Demonox didn't buy Resident Evil 6. But still, I thank him for that, just because it gave me a chance to see the game with my own eyes, at least, without me having to actually open up my wallet for finances that I'm always struggling with. So yeah, in short, Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and 4 are decent survival horror games, despite the fact that 4 was a completely different beast compared to what the first 3 games were like. Despite the fact I really like Resident Evil 5 and I really like the fact Wesker's hammy acting makes the game for me, I really wouldn't recommend it. You know, just because it's too action-packed for a Resident Evil game. Even for guilty pleasure's sake, I wouldn't recommend it. Though, as from a horror aspect, the first 3 games were not that good with horror at all. They had some nice atmosphere, and then jump scare, and run away from a monster here and there, which I believe Resident Evil 6 also copied from Resident Evil 2 in certain cases. So yeah, they're actually decent games, and if you have not tried a Resident Evil game before, then I do not see any reason not to recommend those games to you guys, because they're decent, at least. Especially if you're just getting into horror games, because to be honest, I think they're horror friendly for people who want to get into the genre. To me it is, anyway. So anyway, thanks for joining me for this first Horror Games Tales, and I hope to see you for the next one. Take care.